Hi and welcome to today's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast. It's going to be a little bit different. Today I'm going to be brutal. I'm not holding back and I'm going to tell you some of the brutal truths about property investing. You're going to learn some of the things that can go wrong. You're going to learn about some of the frustrations of being a property investor. You're going to learn about some of the ways in which slick marketing can lead you astray. Hey, but stick with me. It's not all negative, as Brett Warren, National Director of Metropole, joins me to help you understand what could go wrong, but it's our way of making sure things don't go wrong for you so you can enjoy the success a small group of property investors enjoy. So, let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Hi, Brett.
Hi, Michael. Good to be with you.
Well, Brett, as I said in the introduction, the main problem that many people don't understand when they get into property investment is that most investors never get the results they're looking for. The statistics from the tax office shows that only less than 20,000 Australians own 6 or more investment properties. 92% don't get past their first or second property. And of those who get in the market, more than 50% sell up in the first 3 to 5 years. Despite all the information, despite the podcast, despite the blogs. So I guess what I'm trying to do in our chat today is show people some of the brutal truths about property investment that other people don't tell them about. But the reason we're doing that is not to be negative about property. I think we both feel very positive about it, but to let people know what to beware of, Brett.
I think you're right. I think a good analogy, Michael, is starting to play a new game. You've got to understand the rules. And I guess rather than finding them out the hard way, why not listen to someone who's been doing it for 40 or 50 years and make life a bit easier?
Well, once you know the game, it's simple. It's maybe not easy, but it's simple if you follow the rules. If you do what most property investors do, if you listen to what most people are saying on the podcast, the blogs, the emails, the YouTubes, you're going to get the same result as most. And that's not pretty. So let's head in the right direction. I think one of the important things to understand is that the property market moves in cycles. A lot of people think, I'm just going to buy a property and it'll keep moving up in value.
Yeah, it is. It's very hard to understand that if you haven't invested through multiple cycles, I guess, because once you've been through multiple cycles, you kind of get that deja vu feeling, don't you? Where you've been through that before and you understand where and what's happening. A lot of people kind of get stuck in the moment, whether it's a good boom period or whether it's a flat period, and they don't really feel that things will change. So it's very hard to kind of make decisions with any confidence. But once you can move past that, it's really important. And again, even through the bad times, if you're making sure you're getting in the right areas, the right locations, investment grade locations are less volatile. And I was even speaking to someone today, Michael, who has invested in Melbourne. And despite Melbourne not doing as well overall, the property in the area and the purchase we purchased for him has actually done exceptionally well. So it's really important to understand that now, isn't it?
It is. Actually, I think you made a good point there a moment ago that you tend to think the current conditions are going to keep going on. So if it's difficult times, people worry that it's not going to improve. And if it's really good times, people are often overconfident when maybe that's the time they should be more cautious. And when things are in the cyclical downturn, as long as there's no other major factor, that's not like we're trying to time the market, but that's actually the time when there's the least risk there. I think the other big secret that many people don't realise is you actually need a significant amount of money to invest. I know people say that you can do it with no money down and bypass the banks and flip properties and find mortgagee sales. It doesn't work that way, does it?
Oh, okay. Sorry, I saw something on Facebook this morning that said I could do it for free and with no money down and become a millionaire. No, it doesn't. That's a hard reality. Those kinds of things are very, very highly risky and most of the time they don't work out. I guess it's attention-grabbing headlines. But no, it is. It's a long process. You've got to be disciplined. You've got to borrow large amounts of money to get into the market. But then the benefit is you can actually leverage into higher properties and higher locations, lower risk locations, and get superior returns. So you're exactly right. It's a long-term game and there's no such thing as getting rich quick.
Well, if you don't have the financial discipline to save a deposit, you really shouldn't be borrowing the money to get involved in property, because there are the ups and downs that we're going to keep talking about as we chat today. And so you've got to have the financial discipline. I think the other thing is that a truth that no one wants to hear is it takes a long time to become financially independent through property. Now, the reason people buy property is not to own the property, even though that's the fun and exciting bit for many beginning investors, but it's to have choices in life, to have a level of financial freedom, to have a cash machine. I remember not that long ago, I was asked by a journalist, how long does it take to develop financial independence through property? And I told her 30 years. And she really didn't like that.
No, she wouldn't want to hear that.
No, that's not what she wanted to print. And I said, well, the main reason is that for the first 10 years, people make mistakes. They pay a learning fee. They learn what not to do. They choose the wrong property or the wrong strategy, or most of them don't have a strategy. And the next few years, selling up underperforming properties and getting their financial house into order. And then it takes a couple of good property cycles to actually build a substantial asset base. Of course, you can cut that by getting the right mentors, buying the right property, not making those mistakes, Brett.
I think that's what we're talking about, isn't it? Talking about the rules of the game, and when you're getting into a business, or a property business in this case, having someone there who can shorten that period up, making sure you don't make the mistakes. And it is simple, but it's not easy. So as you said, it's really just a matter of putting your capital in the best available location you can and trying to forget about it for the next 15, 20 years, isn't it?
Well, that's a good point, because you shouldn't be fiddling with it, but people like to. I guess there's another thought along the same lines that I think it was Warren Buffett who said, I'll be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. It's easy to say, but it's not easy to do when your mortgage rates go up, or when the tenants give you a hard time, or when the media keeps telling you things are going to crash. As we said, most investors are over-optimistic at the wrong times during the booms and pessimistic when things are down. Don't listen to the media.
No, look, the first time that saying hit home for me was when we had the floods here in 2011 in Brisbane, and it was really horrible feeling, Michael. We kind of felt like the world was never going to recover, and particularly the property market. It was a real shell shock of what was going to happen, and then obviously having been through those cycles before, you start to see the signs of recovery and green shoots and things like that as well. But certainly a really difficult time, particularly when the world is against and so negative. It's hard to kind of be a shining beacon and jump out and buy something and be optimistic, isn't it?
It is. Well, that actually probably brings us to the next brutal truth. No one really knows what the property market's going to do in the short term. Just look at all those predictions 12 months ago where people thought the market in 2023 was going to keep tanking because of rising interest rates. The real concern at the moment to me is all the commentators are saying the market's going to be really strong this year.
Yeah.
Why believe them when they got it so wrong last time?
That's right.
In the long term, the market's driven by the fundamentals that we always look at, and that's what investors should be wondering about. Where's the market going to be in 10 years, 15 years' time? But it's hard to take the human emotion out of it and the crowd psychology out of it.
Yeah, I like we've discussed this previously, Michael. I like the fact that you have expectations over the next decade. You don't do forecasts. You expect what's going to happen. And I think it's a lot easier to make an educated and informed decision over a decade than what's going to happen in the next 12 or 18 months. That's for sure.
Sure. I think another factor that people don't recognise as we're going through these brutal truths that very few people seem to tell about is that property investment's a game of finance with some properties thrown in the middle, Brett.
Yeah. Look, nothing more evident at the moment. I'm dealing with a lot of clients who are stuck with their borrowing capacity and they can't borrow, and they think that they're the only ones. But that's not the case. You're always going to get stuck. Everyone, whether you're earning a small amount or a large amount. Everyone's
got a limit, haven't they, of what they can borrow?
What you can borrow, absolutely. And someone's going to hit that. And it's okay to actually hit that capacity as long as you've got assets that are going to grow and compound and leverage. And people make the mistake of thinking, I'm going to get stuck. I've got to sell and I've got to buy again. And that opens up a whole nother discussion. It's just too expensive. Property's an expensive game to get in and out. So, holding those properties over a longer period of time and, really looking forward and not worrying about, I guess, the finance and being stuck and things like that as well, but having and sticking to a plan.
Well, having a good finance strategy buys you that time. So when we refer to our finance strategists, our clients at Metropole, get a part of their big picture strategy, a finance strategy, to buy themselves time in the market by having financial buffers in place. And that sees them through the ups and downs. And sure, it still hurts when interest rates go up or if things change, but you don't have to sell properties off. The other brutal truth I'd like to share is that property investment's meant to be boring. Make your investing boring so that the rest of your life's exciting, Brett.
Yes, I like your bungee jumping and trail bike riding and hot air ballooning analogy. If you want to, get some excitement.
Well, basically, I say if you want to get excitement, don't look at it from your real estate investing. Go bungee jumping, go trail bike riding. That's right. I know it's fun going out to open for inspections. I know it's fun negotiating, but in fact, I think our investment philosophy at Metropole, which has been proven over, almost 5 decades now, is too boring for most intelligent people. They think there's got to be more. They think they've got to be more active, Brett.
It's so true, isn't it? But I would argue also, Michael, that's the definition of creating longer-term wealth, isn't it? It's not moving pieces and puzzles around in the short term. It's just sticking to a long-term plan, holding, treating it like a business and a portfolio. That can be very, very boring, particularly if you get stuck and you can't do anything for 2 or 3 years. You feel like you need to be moving and doing something to add some value or leap ahead and get to that goal faster, when in reality it's just a time in the market.
Well, I'd recommend to our clients to buy their property and then hibernate for a year and then pop your head up and come back for an annual review, and we'll see how's it going, what's going on, are you able to do something again? And if you can't, just hibernate for another year. Get on with your life and then come back again. And it's interesting how compounding works, and over time you can keep growing your portfolio. Another brutal truth is that there's more free property information available today than ever before. But much of it's useless. Most of the market news is useless. Actually, it's worse than useless. Brett, I think a lot of it's harmful to your financial health.
Yeah, it can be a positive if you're very certain, you know what you're doing, you've got your plan, you know the fundamentals and the information you need to analyse, because you can get access to that more easily than you ever can before. But the problem is now you've got a million different things rather than 100,000 different things to analyse, and it just becomes so difficult. You've got someone over here telling you don't have to put money in, someone over here telling you it's hard. There's so many different things, but it's very, very difficult. So as you kind of said, most of the information is useless, and it's funneling that out, and having a mentor or having someone to guide you to the right information and principles.
Well, I think having been around a few cycles, we're both in the position that we can see some patterns in the chaos that other people are seeing at the moment. So it actually is simple. We've said this a couple of times. There's 100 million things you need to know, like you said, or it seems that way when you get into it, but there's really probably only 8 or 10 fundamentals that you need to correctly understand to outperform the averages.
And you probably just need to know someone who knows it. It's the same with finance and tax, and you just need to know someone who knows it and who's been there and done that for many, many, many years. Well,
it's impertinent to think that you can learn it faster, better, quicker than somebody who's done it for 20, 30 years. That's right. So I guess that answer means you've got to be careful who you listen to, and don't listen to those get-rich-quick stories. It's actually probably worth listening to people who've made mistakes, though, and avoid the spruikers who tell you how easy it is, how quick it is, how they're on your side. I had 2 experiences this week that maybe I should quickly share. One was somebody in the property space who was telling me about how one of the colleagues he works with is a buyer's agent and have done really well this year because he sold 100 apartments on the Gold Coast, and the Gold Coast has done well. And the answer is yes, the Gold Coast real estate has done well, but if he sold a whole apartment block out to his clients, he's not a buyer's agent, even though he puts himself out to that, because basically it can't be that every client who walks in through his door needs the same sort of property in the same location. And the other one is somebody who paid a significant amount of money to a buyer's agency who offered him, and he's got a budget of $800,000, a property in Port Lincoln. And I said, where's Port Lincoln? And I looked it up on the map, and it's actually a really beautiful holiday spot. But there's no big economy in the area. There's fishing, there's the seafood industry there, there's
Lovely
fishing,
seafood.
But it's so very dependent upon one industry and holiday makers and retirees. So, yeah, there will be tenants there. It looks really, really pretty, but is that where many people are going to move over the next decade and decades? Is that where wages are going to go up? And he said, okay, actually, I won't take that recommendation. I'll ask them for another one. And I said, hang on. if that was their best recommendation of the 250,000 properties available for sale in Australia at the moment, and you realise their first choice isn't any good, why would you even go with their second choice? But he'd felt he'd sunk money into paying them a significant fee, half their fee up front. And that's the way a lot of people work at the moment, isn't it? Pay me half my buyer's agent fee up front and the rest later.
Yep, you're kind of trapped, aren't you? I guess that leads to the next one, Michael.
Be careful who you listen to.
Yeah, be careful who you listen to. But the next point is there's actually no accountability for a lot of these property gurus and hotspot. Like nothing, it's not a heavily regulated industry as it is with financial advising and things like that as well.
Let's go back a step. It's not a regulated industry.
Yes.
Not even, forget heavily.
Well, even, we talk about the buyer's agent story where you could be a painter for 20 years and do a buyer's agent course over a weekend, and all of a sudden you're dealing with people's millions of dollars. So there is very little accountability, little to no accountability, isn't there? Even
with the media will run the latest stories and tell about people who bought multiple properties or got great deals or did mortgage deals or flips or whatever. And when they're wrong and when the others lose out, or all those who predicted the mortgage rate cliff and the other issues, there's no accountability in the media either. Look, Brett, I know a lot of people who've got heaps of followers on social media, but they tend to get them because they tell people what they want to hear. In an echo chamber world, you don't stand much of a chance to get anybody's attention by telling them what they need to hear. You've got to tell them what they want to hear, and then they're happy to follow you.
I've seen a really good meme with that, Michael. It's what you want to hear, and there's a line of people out the door, and then next to it there's a sign that says the truth, and there's no one there.
Isn't that interesting? I guess everyone's cocooned themselves in their warm little social media paradise. No challenging, no disturbing, no opposing ideas allowed. Some commentators have learned that as long as they tell people what they want to hear, they can actually be wrong indefinitely, and as you said at the beginning, without even any penalty.
Yeah, even a clock's right twice a day, so eventually they'll get something right, but it's very, very few and far between, isn't it?
So the market will fall again. The market will have a difficult time again, but all those people who've sat back waiting for their property pessimists to be right have missed out. I guess this is why we're going through some of these brutal truths, and not to be negative, because we are both successful property investors. We have a lot of clients who are as well, but it actually hurts to see people get taken in by these things. So maybe another point I'd like to make to people listening to us today is the more comfortable an investment feels, the more likely you're actually to be being taken in by marketers or salespeople.
Well, I think the best analogy of that, Michael, is being picked up in a limousine with a bottle of champagne. I'd feel pretty comfortable in that space. I feel like I deserve it. And
the good old days of the Gold Coast where they sold you time shares and things like that. Pick you up from the airport.
But they're designed to pick your pain points. And what we mean by that is avoid rental guarantees and promises of certain returns. They can do all the spreadsheets and all the magic and all the kind of things look good because they've been trained professionally to understand what your pain points are with holding costs and cash flow, particularly at the moment with interest rates and cost of living and things like that as well. So as you said, if it feels comfortable and there's answers for everything, then be careful. And I guess that's the point of this podcast, isn't it?
It is, very much so. Now, people often ask me, well, what's the big difference between those small group of successful investors and the average investor? And interestingly, it's not the knowledge that they've got, but in fact, it's not any secrets that they've got because most of it's out in the public arena anyway. It's actually the way they think, their mindset, their rich habits. And that's one of the reasons why at Wealth Retreat, even though we spend a lot of time talking about the tax strategies and the investment strategies and the business strategies that separate the top 1% from the average investor or business person, we also spend a lot of time on mindset. And all the people there already have got successful mindsets. That's how they got there. But they're still prepared to get rid of some of their disempowering beliefs and include some more of their empowering beliefs in the way they think.
Yeah, boy, this is a big topic. It's something that's close to my heart as well because we talk about your thermostat and your wealth thermostat and things like that as well. And I think there's a lot of people that can grow their mindset and open it up to a lot more opportunities that are probably just passing them by. And I know we use the car analogy. If you think about how many red Toyotas did you pass on the way to work today? Well, you wouldn't know. But if I offered you $50 for every red Toyota, you'd probably have about $500 or $600.
You'd see them, wouldn't you?
It's really helping you understand that mindset's really critical. And I think adding to that is once you've got that mindset and those steps in place, I think the next thing is actually taking action. I think that separates.
Yes, that's a good point.
Successful, yeah.
Very, very much so. Oh, by the way, while we're saying it then, Wealth Retreat's coming up at the end of April, where Brett's going to be talking a lot about the property and the research we do and how to research like a professional. We've got Mark Burris as the keynote speaker, talking about the Mark Burris story and how he started as a mortgage broker and has now basically got a public company that's a very big financial company. Andrew Wilson talking about the property and the economy, Pete Wargent, Simon Kirstenmacher, Ken Race, Mark Creed, and a whole group of people. I've left out a few people, but go to wealthretreat.com.au and don't count yourself out. I know I spoke to somebody the other day who thought they're not ready for it because I don't want to be like those rich people, she said. She thought that rich people are bad and ugly and greedy. Having said that, she was already very, very wealthy and successful, but didn't see herself as such. But it's a lovely group of people, isn't it? And there's a lot of talk about true wealth, not just money and property, but contribution, health, spirituality, recreation, family. So you come in with lots of ideas, but you go home with some firm plans about all those areas of your life, Brett.
I think she's in for a very pleasant surprise, Michael, because a lot of the people you meet there are really friendly, outgoing people. They want to help. They want to tell their story. They want to share not just positive, negative and lessons they've learned along the way. It's such an encouraging environment. So I think she's going to be very pleasantly surprised.
Well, she is coming along, so that'll be good. Now, as we go through the brutal truths that you need to know if you want to be a successful property investor, my suggestion is if you have significant credit card debt and you think about investing, stop. I mentioned before that really you've got to become financially fluent. You've got to learn how to manage money because taking on extra debt could overwhelm you. Again, that's part of the reason why part of the strategic plan we put together is a finance and, in fact, the software we use, money management strategy as well.
Yeah, look, I'd also add to that. I mean, if you've got a $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 credit card debt, then it's unbelievable how much that affects your borrowing capacity too.
Doesn't it?
You could be $100,000 different. So yeah, get that out the way, maximize your borrowing capacity as well, and get into those more positive habits and take that over.
Now, one of the reasons most investors don't get to the level they want to, build a big enough asset base, get a big enough property portfolio, is that they don't understand that residential real estate is basically a high growth but a relatively low yield investment. So they buy real estate for cash flow. They don't have enough cash flow. So they can't manage their money, so they hope the real estate's going to fix it up. Of course, cash flow is important. It keeps you in the game, but it's really capital growth that gets you out of the rat race, Brett.
It certainly is. I think this is the number one rule of the property investment game, isn't it? But so many people look away and don't really follow it and don't really understand that rules. The other thing is with cash flow. I mean, how many people would have bought a cash flow positive property 18 months ago, Michael, and now they're finding it's not growing in value and it's actually costing them a lot of money as well.
That's right. Now, again, if you follow rules for overseas, in America where the rules are different, in New Zealand where the rules are different, in Europe, and with the internet, all these gurus come and tell you what to do, even though they've stopped coming. I haven't seen many overseas people come and tell us to buy cash flow positive properties for a while here, Brett. But it may work overseas, but that's not how the wealthy grow their wealth in Australia.
No, it's that eighth wonder of the world. It's compounding and leverage, and it can be even. We talked the other day, didn't we? 1% different or 0.5% difference over 20 years is adds up to be a significant amount on a good property.
Sure. Okay. Another truth I'd like to share is just because a property goes up in value doesn't necessarily mean it's a great investment. I mean, if we go back a couple of years before the downturn of 2022, when interest rates started to slow our market down, we had a once-in-a-generation boom. And it reminds me of Warren Buffett's saying, a rising tide lifts all ships. But when the tide goes out, you see who's swimming naked. And that fits in with what you were saying a while ago. If they bought a good, what they thought was a cash flow positive property a couple of years ago, in a normal market, the markets are fragmented and some areas outperform others. On the other hand, during that period where interest rates were so low, anyone and everyone could buy a property, and property values went up in secondary locations as well as good locations. But at the moment, where the market's definitely turned into positive, A-grade locations, investment-grade locations, A-grade homes are selling well, and secondary locations are floundering.
Yeah, look, this is a good one. I had a client the other week that came through and we were looking for a development site, and he wanted a development site with cash flow, which doesn't, you obviously know, doesn't happen. But we talked a little bit about the why, and his partner had bought a site, and I think they'd made $300,000 in the last 3 or 4 years out of the site just by holding it, which was great. But when I actually went back and did the analysis, they purchased that site because it had a 4.5% yield, a much better yield, and they could room share it and all those types of things, which is great. But we actually looked at a property in the same kind of location, just in a better pocket, in a better street that they paid the same amount for. And it was actually about $100,000 worth more in value. So even though they were getting an extra $5,000 a year in rent, which is good, helpful, $100,000 over that period of time is a game changer.
Tax-free.
Yep. Yeah. Without doing anything, just by selecting the right property, the right location, and sticking to those fundamentals you spoke about.
So, interestingly, there's not one Brisbane, one Sydney, one Melbourne property market. At Metropole, we have all this research behind us, a significant research department. And I know you and I are currently waiting for just the latest set of figures to input further into the data that we do. So we're very selective about locations because you can't change that, and then the right property in the location. But data on its own isn't enough. A lot of people have got the same data. It's basically from the Australian Bureau of Statistics and REIA, and other people sell it. First of all, you've got to be able to interpret it, but it's really like looking in a rear vision mirror. And if you keep driving around looking in a rear vision mirror, looking at the data, you're much more likely to have an accident and have a crash. So when we at Metropole changed 15 years or so ago to, rather than look in the rear vision mirror, looking what's ahead, looking where there's going to be economic growth, looking to be where there's going to be jobs growth because of economic growth, but the sort of jobs growth, we're looking for jobs growth at the higher wage earning capacity. That'll bring people in, that'll bring people into locations that where they want to live, where their jobs are. They're going to initially want to rent, they're then going to buy, and then they're going to over time push up property values. So we don't look in the rear vision mirror, even though all that data is helpful. Just as importantly, we actually look at what's ahead. And that's why you and I are good friends with Simon Kirstenmacher and his research at the demographics group, and we like to understand what the big demographic trends are going to be that are going to affect how people are going to live, where people are going to live, and what sort of properties they want to live in.
Yep, and another great topic we discuss every year at Wealth Retreat also.
Yes, Simon gives 2 great presentations there. Another, I started off by calling these brutal truths, is that there are 3 stages in your property investment journey, maybe even 4. The first one is maybe the educational stage, but the 3 stages are, you first got to go through an asset accumulation stage. So that's not cash flow. You've got to grow an asset base. And once your asset base is big enough, then you can move. So you've got to have leverage, the right sort of properties, high growth properties. Then you slowly reduce your loan to value ratios until you can eventually live off the cash machine of your properties. And we don't know what the rules are going to be in 5, 10, 15, 20 years when you want to live off your properties. We don't know if the government's going to allow you to negatively gear or not, whether you're going to be able to borrow from your self-managed super fund or you're not going to be able to use it till later in life, whether the banks are going to lend you money. There's so many things that are going to change in that time, whether there's going to be capital gains tax or more or less. So what we need to do over time is help our clients build a substantial asset base in a flexible way, that they have the right assets in the right ownership structures to give flexibility, that then they can buy their cash, convert their assets to cash in a number of different ways, depending upon what the prevalent conditions are then.
Yeah. Look, it is, and most people think the strategy or the cycle or the stages is just buying a property or 2, but it's not. And we're seeing a lot more people at the moment, Michael, who actually have a couple of good properties, but they don't understand the end game. Where they're going to be in 5 or 10 years' time, and a lot of it's very quite common. A lot of people are just adding properties, but when's the right time to stop, and what do we do with them, and how do we get to the end?
Well, when we sit down with clients at Metropole, one of the first things we ask is, where do you want to go? And then we work backwards, and putting a strategic plan together for them helps them achieve those goals. But one of the trick questions I like asking if I sit with people is, how many properties do you think you're going to need? and they don't know, or they come up with a figure. And I basically say, hey, it's a trick question. You could own one Westfield shopping centre or 20 properties in Alice Springs. I'd rather own a Westfield shopping centre. But interestingly, whatever number they think it is to give them the cash flow that they require for retirement, if they double that number, they'd probably be more close to reality. You can't really have a good life on 2 or 3 properties like some people suggest you can.
No, not unless they're in amazing locations. And I guess the point there is, I mean, the number of properties don't really matter, do they? I mean, we don't want to go and buy 10 properties in 10 minutes like they're suggesting. And what we're suggesting is really understanding if you want to get an end value at $100,000 per annum, then aim for 2. And that's probably going to be more closer to the mark. But it's also considering you've got to take out, expenses and gross and net rental yields and things like that as well. So that's why it really, really pays, because the last thing you want to do now is set yourself up short for your retirement.
Yep, definitely. Because there are so many unknowns there. Now, 2 more unpleasant, brutal truths I'd like to discuss. And one of them, and this has changed a lot over the last couple of years, is that tenants now disproportionately have more rights than landlords. That's changing state by state, because residential tenancy legislation is a state-based legislation, and now it's hard to move your tenants out if you want to renovate or if you want to improve your property. Tenants are allowed to have dogs, cats, other animals. Now, Brett, I'm a pet-friendly landlord. I'm a pet-friendly person. We've got 2 cats and a dog, and I've always allowed pets in my property. But I've got a block of apartments on the ground floor. All the apartments they're 1 bedrooms. The apartments have got access to courtyards. The ground floor ones have all got courtyards. And upstairs, it's one of those apartment blocks where there's no balconies and no courtyards in the top apartments, the whole floor of them there. And recently, in this 1-bedroom apartment, a tenant asked, can they have a dog? And I said to our property manager, no, because it's not fair for the dog. If you go to work, there's no backyard, there's no front yard, there's no courtyard, and they can't go out to pee. There's not even a balcony for them to pee on. That's just an old block of apartments that I bought many years ago, have fully renovated and always leased. It's really nice. But that's not fair or not right for a pet. Interestingly, the tenant took us to VCAT. And the member at VCAT said, yeah, I hear what you say. I know there are 3 or 4 other animals in the building because you've allowed them because they're on the ground floor. But this tenant said that they're going to have pet nappy blanket things on the floor and not ruin your property. And even though it's a small 1-bedroom with no access, no fresh air during the day when you're out, you're allowed to have a pet. They let them have a pet.
No comment. I think I know where you're going with that. It's ridiculous, isn't it? And it's hard. Look, I actually think it's probably going to get worse, isn't it? It's going to be difficult. And this is the reason it's putting a lot of, I guess, would-be property investors off these types of things, taking away the rights for those types of things. And we've got to get that balanced right. Maybe it's going too far the other way. That's probably another discussion. But I guess the ultimate thing is, Michael, that's the brutal truth, as you said. And is it enough for you to change your strategy? There's a change in the game's rules. Do you change your strategy, your longer-term plan?
Well, interestingly, Metropole Property Management covered me, as I'm just another landlord, with a pet clause. But interestingly, you're not allowed to take extra bonds or other things. You can't kick your tenant out if they miss rental payments. You've got to go through weeks, actually months, of going through various eviction processes. During this time, your property is held ransom by an errant tenant. So there's lots of problems. So I'm not saying don't invest, but I think there's 2 messages that come to it from me. One is be careful the demographics in which you own your property. We keep coming back to demographics being important, not just for surrounding owners to push up the value of your property, but I don't want areas where tenants are a week or 2 away from broke. If you think about it, your future income when you retire off your property portfolio is going to be dependent on your tenants not only being able to pay you rent, but paying you increasing rents. So choose areas where tenants are more affluent. It's not a judge of people, but tenants aren't always poor. In fact, a recent report from, I think it was CoreLogic, showed that more and more high net worth people, and again, it's not a judge of people, but more affluent people are renting today than in the past. So again, be careful where you rent your property and then have a good property manager. Never, ever, ever consider managing the property yourself, but have a good property manager to protect your interests.
Definitely. I think the last one, Michael, is something we talk about a bit, is there's no guarantee your property will go up in value. There's no property will go up always all the time. Even good properties don't go up every year, do they? They have flat years. In recessions, they'll come back a little bit. It's not a flat line. Properties don't go up at 6 or 7% per annum every year. So there's cycles we spoke about. But I guess that's something you've got to expect as well, particularly in the next probably 3 or 4 years. I mean, we've had a big boom. A lot of properties that haven't gone up for a while have boomed. And I anticipate that it'll be probably pretty lean for the next 2 to 3 years.
Well, if you think about it as a long-term investor, you've really got to look at where property values have grown over the long term. And that's part of the reason that at Metropole we do research to see what's going on over the long term, what's happened over not just 5 years or since COVID, not just 10 years, but a minimum of 20 years, and in fact more likely 40 years to see what's going on, because there is this concept of mean reversion, that if a market's underperformed for a period of time, it's going to outperform. And interestingly, 1 or 2% seems like a lot of outperformance, but even 0.5%, if a market's done reasonably well over 40 years, that 0.5% increased growth over a decade and 2 decades and 3 decades compounds a lot. But again, I think we've got to have the reassurance that well-located properties will continuously grow because they're going to be in short demand. More people are going to want them. New cost of construction is going to increase. So the triple whammy of more Australians wanting them, more Australians having good high-paying jobs, having more income. But there's lots of areas of Australia that are going to underperform. That's just the way the market works, Brett.
Yep, that is. And that's why it's critical also to make sure you're getting into those areas, because a lot of those outer areas have done sideways for probably 8 years and boom for 2 years, whereas good properties in good locations will grow and compound and leverage, I guess, more consistently. And that also allows you to expand your portfolio a little bit quicker too, doesn't it? Because you're not just waiting for that once-off boom.
Very much so. Interestingly, talking about the outer suburbs, I had 2 interesting podcasts, one with Simon Kirstenmacher and one with Ross Elliott, both who look in the long term of what's happening to our housing markets. And they've both brought up the concept that the outer suburbs are going to suffer with infrastructure. So at the moment they're cheaper, people are buying there, investing there because it's cheaper. But in the medium to long term, in 10, 15 years' time, the government is not going to be able to provide the infrastructure there that's required. In fact, infrastructure lags, and people in the inner suburbs are the ones where the infrastructure is going in. The local councils just don't have enough money to go around, and so are the outer suburbs going to have enough parks, water infrastructure, other infrastructure? Well, according to the clever people I know, they're not going to have as good infrastructure, amenities as the inner, more established areas where the taxpayers are paying more, the councils have got more rates, where the politicians want to be voted in again. And so on that basis, be really careful where you invest. Well, that was a long list of negative things. So what's the positive? I think the bottom line is, in Australia, when you look at the Rich 200 list, you'll find that most wealthy people have either invested in real estate or they've got businesses, made money in that and invested in real estate. Real estate has created more multimillionaires than any other form of investment. It's actually a safe, solid market which has proven itself over time. So despite all these things, if you know how to play the game, there's no reason why you shouldn't take advantage of the property boom that is opening up in front of our eyes. If you think about it, property values are going to be worth 5-10% more at the end of this year than they are today, and they don't care who owns them. I think as this year moves on, interest rates are going to fall. Not sure exactly when that's going to be, but before that happens, the world's going to realise it. Inflation's going to come under control. The rhetoric from the Reserve Bank is going to change. The forecasts from the banks are going to change. And people are already getting into the market, taking advantage of that. And if you're able to get all your ducks in a row to take advantage of the reset that's going to happen later this year, when people recognise that they can borrow more, their jobs are secure, APRA is going to lower its serviceability buffer, so serviceability increases, That's going to create the next upswing in our housing markets because we're just not building enough properties. The rents are going to keep going up. Hundreds of thousands of people are coming into Australia. And if you want to know how to position yourself, the first step in my mind is putting a plan together, planning to become the people you plan to become. And that's what your team at Metropole specialises in, Brett.
Yeah, absolutely. It all starts out with a plan, understanding your end goals, and then working backwards. I think if you ever sit with someone and they start by selling you a property or pouring you a glass of champagne, you're probably in the wrong place.
Yeah, well, I guess that's how we started. We don't give champagne away, do we?
Not anymore.
We offer a coffee when you come in and have a chat with us, but we don't pick you up. We don't visit you at home. You've actually got to sit down. And so, sure, we're Australia's largest buyers agency, but we're much, much more than a buyers agency. We actually offer strategic wealth and property advice, including financial planning, property development, renovations, significant property management department in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane. So we're much more than buyers agency. We're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but small enough to care. So if you want to speak with Brett and his team, go to metropole.com.au. Thanks for your chat, Brett. Look forward to catching up again real soon.
Thanks, Michael. Enjoyed it.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
I recently read a story that I'd like to share with you in today's mindset message, and it's about the bricklayer mentality. Apparently, way back in 2002, Will Smith was interviewed on a television show. And in that interview, during the interview, Smith tells a story from his childhood about his father asking him and his little brother to rebuild a huge fence. Well, it was very big at the time. 16 foot by 30 foot was what he said. You know, that wasn't the old foot rather than metres like we measure. It was apparently a wall on the front of his shop. Anyway, understandably, for two young boys, the task was daunting. Will Smith said, "I remember standing back looking at the wall saying, there's going to be a big hole here forever." But a year and a half later, a year and a half of daily work later, they completed the wall. Reflecting on the experience, Will Smith offered a piece of timeless wisdom, and that's really what I want to share with you today. He said, you don't try and build a wall. You don't start by saying, I'm going to build the biggest, baddest wall that's ever been built. You say, I'm going to lay this brick as perfectly as a brick can be laid. You do that with every single brick, every single day, and soon you have a wall. I guess this is a powerful mentality for life. No matter how big the task or the project may seem at the start, you just have to lay one brick at a time. The wall may be daunting, but today's brick is all that matters. You see, extraordinary results are simply the macro results of tens, hundreds or thousands of tiny daily actions. Remember, small things become big things. So my mindset message to you today is, today and all days, just lay one brick as perfectly as a brick can be laid. Well, thanks for spending the last little while with me, and I hope you got some benefit from this show. If you did, and you know somebody else who'd also benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcasts, there's 3 little buttons down the bottom. Press it and share it, or just tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you'll definitely be doing me a favour and helping me in my quest to make as many people as possible financially literate. Now, there's ways of catching up with me between these shows. Just look for Michael Yardney on social media, or why not join my private Facebook group? Go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. And I have a way of saying thank you to you for subscribing to this podcast. Go to podcastbonus.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where you can get a bunch of ebooks and reports. My way of saying thank you. And when you've got time, why not listen to some of the old podcasts? There's individual lessons in each of those that I think would be helpful for you. I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney Podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael, but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?